She walked in like any other guest. No entourage, no cameras, just the quiet weight of someone used to being underestimated. When the waiter scoffed and told her, "You're the worst Snow White they've ever cast," he didn't know she was signing his paycheck. What happens when the person you humiliate turns out to be your boss? And they don't seek revenge, but something far more haunting. Would you change if your livelihood or dignity depended on it? The night Rachel Zegler walked into Del Mar, the air smelled of roasted thyme and resignation. Hidden behind designer lighting and five-star menu prices was a restaurant on the verge of collapse, the kind that relied on reputation more than reality. Patrons filled the tables out of nostalgia, not satisfaction, and the staff had grown careless in their roles. What they didn't know, not even the sharp-tongued maitre d', was that a new owner had quietly taken over just 2 weeks earlier. Her name was nowhere on the paperwork. Her purchase had been funneled through a silent holding company. Something Rachel insisted on after years in the spotlight had taught her the power of discretion. She didn't want to run Del Mar as a celebrity trophy. She wanted to restore it from the inside out. To do that, she needed to see it from the bottom up. That meant experiencing it like any other woman. No makeup team, no manager, no red carpet smile. Just her, a reserved table, and a hidden mic woven into her scarf. Rachel knew the risk. The last time she'd blended into a place like this, she left in tears, her resume ripped in two and her dignity on the floor. Back then, she was a teenager waiting tables after school, clinging to the dream that one day she'd be someone worth respecting. But respect had never come easy. And as she crossed the threshold into the same kind of room that once spat her out, the ghost of that girl walked beside her. The host barely glanced up. "Name?" he said, not rudely, but without warmth. She gave a fake one, Elena Reyes, and was led to a small table by the window. The waiter arrived moments later, tall, sharp-featured, and dripping with arrogance. Brent. His reputation preceded him even among insiders. He'd once served royalty, boasted about slapping down billionaires, and sneered at influencers who didn't belong in his establishment. He didn't recognize Rachel. Or maybe he did and simply didn't care. That was the worst kind of dismissal, the one that came not from ignorance but from disdain. He handed her the menu without eye contact, already annoyed she wasn't someone he deemed worthy of his charm. "We don't do substitutions," he snapped before she even opened her mouth. She smiled gently and nodded, saying nothing. She observed everything. How the table next to her got extra attention because the man wore a Rolex. How Brent complimented a blonde guest on her earrings, but sneered when Rachel asked a question about the wine. How he muttered under his breath as he walked away, just loud enough for her to hear. TikTok actors trying to play grown-up. Her hand stayed steady on the glass. Inside, her pulse thundered. The service was icy. The staff hierarchy was suffocating. Brent even made jokes in the kitchen loud enough for others to hear. What's next? Ariana Grande doing sushi. Laughter erupted. No one corrected him. No one even hesitated. It was culture. Toxic, thick, and inherited. Rachel finished her meal in silence, taking notes mentally with every interaction. This wasn't just a place in need of new decor. It needed a spiritual exorcism. On her way out, Brent said, "Next time, maybe wear something a little more evening." His eyes flicked over her coat, unimpressed. "You'll blend in better." She nodded again, quietly. "I'm sure I will." Outside, the street was cold, but her resolve burned. In her car, she pulled out a slim, leather-bound notebook. She wrote one sentence across a fresh page in thick black ink. They don't know they're already fired. The wheels were in motion. The cameras had done their work. And the next time she walked into Del Mar, she wouldn't be playing the guest. She'd be playing God. Character count. No spaces, 7493. By the time Rachel returned to Del Mar for her second unannounced visit, the weight of what she had seen still pressed against her ribcage like an invisible bruise. This time, she came without the hidden mic. Not because she didn't need evidence, but because she already had more than enough. The video recordings from her scarf, synced to a discreet phone app, had captured everything. Brent's smug condescension, the staff's laughter behind the kitchen pass, even the cutting remark about her looks on the way out. Her legal team and PR strategist had already reviewed the footage twice. "It's fire," her lawyer had said, shaking his head. "But it's gasoline if you're not careful." Rachel didn't want fire, not yet. She wanted truth. Culture change didn't come from exposure. It came from confrontation, from making people look directly into what they thought they could get away with. That night, she wore the same coat, same understated boots. She walked in like déjà vu incarnate, watched Brent do the same tired script, and took her same seat. But something was different now, in her eyes, in her posture. She didn't come to watch anymore. She came to test. The moment Brent recognized her, he squinted, like something itched in the back of his memory. Then he brushed it off. "Oh, you're back," he said, pretending surprise. "Didn't think we'd see you again." His tone was still poison in a glass. Smooth, deceptive, meant to sting after the swallow. Rachel smiled thinly. Couldn't resist the ambience. Brent didn't hear the irony. He handed her the menu with a theatrical flair and leaned closer. "We've had better guests lately. TikTok influencers, real ones. One of them even tipped in Bitcoin." He chuckled at his own joke. Rachel blinked slowly, unimpressed. He took it as a cue to press further. "You know," he continued, standing a little too confidently, "when I saw you last time, you looked familiar. Took me a while to place it. But then it hit me. You're that Snow White girl, aren't you? The one everyone hates now." The words fell like knives wrapped in velvet. A few heads turned nearby. Brent didn't care. He leaned in further, amused by his own cruelty. Yeah, Zegler, right? The one who ruined childhoods." The chuckle that followed was meaner than before, deeper. Rachel's stomach tightened, but she didn't flinch. She looked him dead in the eyes and said, "That's a strong opinion from someone who doesn't know who he's serving." Brent laughed, completely misreading her. "Trust me, I know exactly who I'm serving. Another Hollywood has-been who thought she could act." At that moment, a younger waitress named Mia, who had been quietly serving wine 2 tables over, froze. Her eyes darted toward Rachel, and something in her posture changed. She recognized her. The shock didn't show on her face, but her movements turned careful, as though aware that something seismic was about to break beneath the surface. Brent, blind in his arrogance, kept digging. He whispered loudly enough for the next table to hear, "You know what your problem is? You think everyone should like you, that you can just change classic stories and people won't push back. But this place, we like things the old way." Rachel stayed still as though absorbing every syllable for later. And she was. The cameras planted discreetly behind the wine rack, disguised as motion sensors, were already rolling. A small LED blinked once, invisible to the eye, but it meant everything was being archived. She took a slow sip of water, no longer listening to Brent's tirade, but watching how the rest of the staff responded. Some looked away. Others pretended not to hear. But Mia lingered too long at the silverware tray, her ears red. That meant guilt, or maybe just shame. When Brent left the table, muttering something about fragile actresses, Rachel gently flagged Mia. "Could you tell the chef Elena Reyes would love to compliment the halibut special? And that she'll be bringing some people by tomorrow to watch the dinner service." Mia blinked. She nodded, but her eyes widened slightly. The name meant something. "Of course," she said softly, almost reverently. Brent returned with the wine bottle, fake smiling. "Hope the service is better this time, Miss Reyes." Rachel leaned in just a fraction, her voice quiet but sharp. "It's exactly what I expected." He smirked, glad to exceed expectations. "You haven't," she said, the edge undeniable now. He raised an eyebrow but said nothing more. Later that night, as Rachel exited through the alleyway door to avoid the press of the front crowd, she passed the kitchen window where the staff gathered to smoke or complain. Brent was there, laughing loudly. Can't believe she showed her face again. She thinks she's famous, but in here, she's nobody. Snow White my ass. The words drifted through the night like oil on water. Rachel paused beneath a flickering street lamp, her shadow long and unmoving. She didn't look back. She didn't need to, because tomorrow, when she walked in again, Brent would learn who exactly had been sitting at his table, and just how wrong he was to think the old way still ruled the world. Rachel sat alone in the dim quiet of her private office, surrounded by walls of exposed brick and aged mahogany bookshelves, far removed from the noise and smug laughter still echoing through Delmare's dining room. The contrast was intentional. Her office, tucked inside an inconspicuous building a block away, was her sanctuary. No glitz, no signatures, just space to think, plan, and remember. On her desk rested a slim, leather-bound journal, the same one she had scrawled in the night Brent mocked her the first time. But tonight, she didn't write anything new. Instead, she opened to a page already stained with ink and memory, one she had written nearly a decade earlier. The handwriting was shakier then, younger. One day, I'll own the room that tried to humiliate me. Not to get even, to teach them they were never bigger than decency. Her thumb ran along the page's edge, and for a moment, the present dissolved. She was 16 again, standing in the back of a bustling Mexican-American bistro in Jersey, where she'd worked weekends to save for acting classes. Her uniform was always slightly too big, her smile permanently cautious. One night, a table of businessmen made jokes she pretended not to understand. Her manager told her to smile and let it go when one of them asked if Snow White took tips and kisses. Afterward, she'd cried in the dry storage room, the scent of garlic and shame mingling in her throat. That night, she wrote that journal entry. That night, the resolve was born. And now, here she was, living proof that some ghosts don't haunt, they guide. Rachel stood and walked toward the corkboard on the far wall, where clippings of past roles and rejection letters had once lived. Most were gone now. All that remained were 3 photos. A snapshot of her younger self in a makeshift Snow White costume, a black and white of her parents standing proudly at her high school graduation, and a grainy picture of the old bistro's kitchen. She stared at that last one the longest. It was printed from a security cam still she'd found online years ago, the only image left of the place after it shut down. In it, she stood near the sink, head lowered, body stiff. It was the exact posture she'd seen Mia, the young waitress at Del Mar, holding just last night. There was something about Mia's eyes, wide, alert, always watching. She reminded Rachel of herself. The way she flinched at Brent's sarcasm. The way she lingered nearby, neither complicit nor courageous. And that was what bothered Rachel the most. Not Brent's venom, but the silence that fertilized it. She'd seen it before, endured it before. She knew its cost. She turned back to her desk and reached for the remote on its surface. One button activated the wall-mounted monitor behind her. Footage played, angles from her secret visit, audio synced perfectly. She watched Brent roll his eyes, scoff, and laugh as though cruelty was currency. She didn't flinch. She let the full moment wash over her again. Not because she needed reminding, but because she was planning something precise. Not revenge, but revelation. Something educational, transformational. Rachel knew public takedowns only went so far. Twitter trends faded. Headlines turned. But culture, that was harder to uproot. Especially in places like Del Mar, where power dressed itself in etiquette and tradition. That's why she needed to go deeper. She grabbed a new notepad, tore off a clean sheet, and began mapping a flowchart. Phase 1, observation. Complete. Phase 2, pressure test. Complete. Phase 3, exposure. Pending. Phase 4, reset. Then, under that, she scribbled something bold. All caps. What's the price of dignity in a room built on EGO? The next day, she would make them answer that. But tonight, her thoughts turned back to the girl she used to be. Too scared to speak up. Too green to know that her silence wasn't weakness. Just a seed waiting for the right season. She reached into the drawer and pulled out a folded letter she'd kept for years, written to herself during a darker chapter. Right after her first film bombed and a director told her she'd never carry a studio movie again. She read it aloud now, not for affirmation, but as a ritual. You're not here to be liked. You're here to shine a light on what they hide. Those words had carried her through auditions, interviews, and now ownership. Rachel folded the letter again and tucked it in her coat pocket. The coat she'd worn into Delmare would be worn again tomorrow. Not for disguise this time, but as a symbol. She'd walk back in, cameras rolling, crew in place, and the same people who laughed at her would perform a new act. This time, unaware they were auditioning for something much bigger. What Rachel was about to stage wasn't just an ambush, it was a mirror. And not everyone was going to like what they saw in their reflection. The next evening, Delmare sparkled with the illusion of elegance, oblivious to the trap being set beneath its polished surface. Everything looked normal on the outside, fresh-cut flowers on the hostess stand, flickering candles lining each linen-draped table, and an unusually enthusiastic buzz among the staff about a supposed television shoot happening that night. The Hollywood docuseries cover story had spread like wildfire after Rachel's team strategically leaked it to the restaurant's general manager, who, eager for fame and free publicity, had told the staff to be on their best behavior. What none of them knew, not the servers, not the bartenders, not even Brent, was that the film crew wasn't there for a docuseries. They were there to document the reckoning. They arrived through the back alley like clockwork, professional but discreet, slipping through the kitchen in neutral black clothing, hauling equipment that looked unassuming but was primed for high-definition exposure. Boom mics were disguised as ambient light poles. Cameras were mounted behind wine racks and bar shelves, wired into a private van parked 2 blocks away. Every angle, every word, every twitch of arrogance was now set to be recorded in crisp clarity. Rachel didn't enter right away. She sat in the production van, headset on, watching the feeds. On one screen, Brent was already in character, his ego dialed up to full volume as he boasted to the crew that he trained half the waiters in New York, and that, if this thing gets picked up by Netflix, maybe they'll finally cast someone who deserves the attention. She watched him rehearse fake humility like it was a monologue, grinning through clenched teeth, complimenting guests in a syrupy tone he never used before. But even under the spotlight, he couldn't help himself. The comments still slipped, one about how the industry was ruined by diversity hires, another about how real actors don't get their roles off Twitter. Rachel said nothing. She waited. Timing was everything. When she finally entered, it was from the front door this time, dressed in a simple but commanding black suit, heels echoing against the marble floor like the countdown to judgment. Conversations paused. Brent turned, his rehearsed smile freezing mid-performance. He blinked twice, clearly unsure whether this was part of the show or the beginning of something else. "Good evening," she said softly, and walked past him without a second glance. The film crew pivoted with perfect coordination, capturing his visible confusion as she made her way to a private dining room now transformed into a live interview set. One by one, staff were called in under the pretense of giving background interviews about working in fine dining during a cultural shift. Mia came in first, her hands shaking slightly, but her words steady. She spoke about tension, about favoritism, about how some staff were afraid to speak up when Brent went too far. She didn't name names, but her eyes told the story. Another server followed, and another. Then it was Brent's turn. He swaggered in, clearly under the impression that this was his spotlight moment. He adjusted his collar, sat down with ease, and asked the camera crew if they could get his good side. Rachel stepped into the room behind the camera, arms folded, not speaking yet. "Let's start with your experience here," the producer said calmly. "Tell us what makes this place special." Brent launched into a rehearsed speech, words dripping with false humility, about how Delmare was a temple of old-world hospitality, how he'd protected its standards, and how he trained younger staff to appreciate refinement. Rachel nodded once to the producer. "Play it," she whispered. The screen behind Brent flickered to life. The footage rolled. It wasn't Hollywood polished, just raw and real. Brent's voice filled the room, sneering, mocking, unmistakable. "Zegler? The worst Snow White ever. Can't act her way out of a paper bag. Then, you think you're famous? You're a footnote." The room went still. Brent stared at the screen, his face draining of color. His jaw tightened. His hands clenched the arms of his chair. "What is this?" he asked, his voice brittle. Rachel stepped forward. That, she said, voice low but clear, is who you are when you think no one's watching. He stood abruptly. This is entrapment, he growled. I didn't sign up for this. You signed up for honesty, she countered, her eyes never leaving his. And unfortunately for you, the truth doesn't require consent. The camera didn't blink. Neither did Rachel. You've had control of this dining room for years, she continued. You've mocked guests, humiliated staff, created a culture of quiet cruelty. But tonight, the curtain falls. Brent stammered, searching for allies. None came. The door behind him opened, and the rest of the staff stood there, having just watched the same footage. Mia was at the front, chin lifted, her gaze steady. I think we've heard enough, Rachel said finally, and turned her back to him. Brent stormed out, brushing past the crew, knocking over a chair on the way. His performance was over. The audience had left the theater. Rachel sat down, motioning the cameras to continue rolling. Tonight, she said to the remaining staff, is about who you choose to be when the masks come off. You can stay in the shadow Brent left behind. Or you can help me rebuild this place into something better. Something honest. No one moved at first. Then Mia stepped forward. Where do we start? She asked. Rachel smiled for the first time all night. With the truth. Always with the truth. The fallout hit Del Mar like a quiet implosion. No explosions, no fire alarms, just the heavy silence of a staff realizing their walls weren't just breached. They had been mirrors all along. In the hours following Brent's exposure, the restaurant's air changed. The scent of lavender candles and sautéed shallots still floated through the hall. But the energy was different, raw, unsettled, charged with something unspoken. Brent had stormed out into the night, his apron flung over one shoulder like a white flag in denial. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't ask for a second chance. He simply vanished into the streetlights like a man running from his own reflection. No one followed. The next morning, Rachel arrived early, well before the first prep cooks had tied on their coats. The dining room was empty, chairs still stacked, lights dimmed to a soft amber glow. She walked to the center, placed a blank notepad on the host stand, and wrote a single word at the top. Begin. As the team trickled in, unsure whether they still had jobs or a future, they were met not with discipline, but silence. The kind that asks, now who will you choose to be? Rachel didn't speak right away. She waited, watched, let the weight of their complicity settle into the air like dust. Mia entered last, her expression unreadable, but her presence carried something solid, a quiet commitment. Rachel finally broke the silence. The doors stay closed today, she said. No service, no guests, just us. Some looked relieved, others nervous, a few suspicious. There's no script, she continued.
No lecture.
This isn't about blame. It's about deciding if this place still means anything worth saving. Then she did something unexpected. She removed her jacket, rolled up her sleeves, and walked into the kitchen. Not as a boss, as someone ready to clean, organize, and rebuild from the roots up. Slowly, staff followed. The dishwasher, a man in his 60s named Carlos who hadn't said 10 words all year, stepped in beside her and began scrubbing down the walls. Mia opened every drawer, tossing outdated inventory slips and dusting shelves. A line cook named Devin started reorganizing the spice rack while humming nervously. One by one, the restaurant's heartbeat returned, not from orders or tips, but from effort, unity, and the rediscovery of pride. Rachel kept working, sweating, and never once bringing up Brent. She didn't need to. His absence was louder than his presence ever was. By midday, the staff gathered in the dining room, exhausted but lighter. Rachel stood among them, a damp cloth still in her hands, and said, "What we tolerate becomes our standard. I won't tolerate rot. Not in this building, and not in people." The words landed not as threat, but truth. She paused, letting the silence echo again. "That's why you're all still here. Because I believe you've got more to offer than silence and survival." Then she addressed the elephant in the room. Brent wasn't the disease, he was a symptom. The real sickness is the fear that kept everyone quiet. And we don't serve fear here anymore. A murmur of understanding spread. Some nods. A few teary eyes. No one applauded. This wasn't a performance. It was a reckoning. That afternoon, Rachel called a meeting not in the office but in the dining room, chairs in a circle like group therapy. She asked one question, "Why did you stay silent?" The answers varied. "He had power. I didn't want to lose my job. I thought I was the only one who noticed. I didn't know anyone would listen." Rachel listened to every word without interrupting. When the last voice finished, she spoke. "Now you know someone is listening. And now you are responsible for the silence you allow moving forward." The staff sat with that for a long moment and something shifted. A sort of collective understanding that this job, this restaurant, was no longer just a paycheck or a stepping stone. It was a mirror, and it was up to them whether they saw dignity or decay in the reflection. That night, Rachel posted a private video message to the staff's internal chat. It wasn't about punishment or policy. It was a story of her first job, of being humiliated, of choosing silence once and regretting it for years. She ended the video by saying, "We don't get to rewrite the past, but we can refuse to repeat it." At the bottom, she attached an anonymous form titled, "What Delmare Needs to Become." Within hours, the submissions poured in. Safer spaces for staff, training for conflict resolution, support systems for reporting abuse without fear. Not one suggestion was about food or tips. They were about people. And that, Rachel realized, was the real transformation. When Brent's locker was emptied later that week, a folded napkin was found wedged behind the shelf. Someone had scribbled on it with a permanent marker, "If you hate the people you serve, you don't belong in service." No one knew who wrote it. No one claimed it. But it was framed and placed on the staff hallway wall, just above the time clock. And from that moment forward, it became more than a saying, it became the standard. 2 weeks later, Delmare reopened not with fireworks or press releases, but with soft lighting, quiet jazz, and a chalkboard at the entrance that read simply, "New season, fresh start." The once rigid, hierarchy-driven atmosphere had been stripped down to something more human, more honest. Gone were the stone-faced servers and cold politeness. In their place stood a team learning to be present, vulnerable, and, most of all, accountable. Brent's absence wasn't mentioned aloud, but it lingered in the pauses between conversations, in the small adjustments staff made to speak up instead of stepping back. Every action inside the restaurant now passed through a different lens, one crafted by Rachel's unwavering standard. If it doesn't uplift, it doesn't belong. That evening, a couple who had dined at Delmare for over a decade sat near the window and whispered to the host, "It feels lighter in here." That was the goal, not just ambience, but atmosphere, integrity in the air itself. Rachel walked through the dining room slowly, not as a celebrity or a manager, but as a quiet observer of a culture she was helping to reshape. Mia moved confidently now, no longer hiding her thoughts or dimming her presence. She wasn't just a waitress. She had been promoted to assistant floor lead, a role Rachel created for her personally, designed to empower the exact kind of voice Brent once muted. In the kitchen, Carlos joked with the line cooks while teaching them how to braise short ribs the way he'd learned 30 years ago, back when kindness in the back of house wasn't a liability. Even the decor had changed. Where there once hung black and white portraits of European chefs in starched coats, there were now candid photos of the staff themselves, laughing, cooking, living. The largest image, framed above the entrance to the kitchen, showed Mia and Carlos high-fiving over a pile of cleaned prep containers, their smiles wide, their hands calloused. It was a reminder that dignity wasn't reserved for patrons. It had to be offered to the people making the experience possible. Still, even as the restaurant healed and grew into its new skin, there was one moment no one knew about. One gesture Rachel made in private that she never intended for the cameras. On the morning before the reopening, she arrived hours ahead of everyone and went to the walk-in storage room, the quietest part of the building. There, pinned behind a loose tile she had found while inspecting renovations, she slid a folded letter and sealed it with tape. The note read, "To the next person who's humiliated, mocked, or made to feel small, you are not invisible. You are not alone. And this place will not break you. This place belongs to you now, too. It was a message to a future she couldn't control, but wanted to influence. A hand extended in advance to someone who hadn't yet walked through the fire. Outside, business picked up quickly. Patrons came not for celebrity sightings but for the story. Not the drama of Brent's fall, but the quiet victory of an institution choosing conscience over convenience. Reviews online didn't mention the scandal much. Instead, they celebrated the shift. "You can feel the soul here now," one wrote. "It's in the service, the food, the way the staff look you in the eye." And though Rachel never officially announced her ownership, word eventually spread. Paparazzi tried to catch her there, but she never entered through the front again. She let the staff be the face of the place, the people who had chosen change, not just endured it. But even as the restaurant blossomed, there were moments that pulled at Rachel's silence. Late at night, she'd sit in her car outside Del Mar and watch the windows glow. Her name never spoken, but her influence unmistakable. She would read old letters she'd written to herself. Reminders that strength didn't come from screaming the loudest, but from knowing exactly when to speak and when to walk away. One afternoon, Mia found a napkin tucked into the register drawer. It wasn't signed. It simply said, "Power isn't the ability to punish. It's the strength to rebuild without needing applause." She didn't ask who left it. She didn't need to. In that moment, she knew the restaurant's soul was intact, not because it had been burned down, but because it had been carefully, deliberately reimagined. On the surface, Brent was gone. But what he represented, arrogance, cruelty disguised as excellence, silence as a form of consent, had been exorcised in a deeper way. It didn't need headlines. It didn't need a viral moment. It just needed a room full of people willing to be better than who they had been. And in the end, that was Rachel's final act. Not a takedown, but a transformation. One no one saw coming. One they'd never forget.